Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We're here today to talk about and listen to the second installment of the Workforce and Leadership Development webinar series. During our conversation today, we're going to talk about adaptable approaches to one-on-ones, along with coaching and feedback. This event today is being recorded and will be posted to the website at a later date. Following the completion of the webinar today, I will be sending out an email with the resources where the recordings will be posted, as well as a quick survey you can fill out if you would like to receive ACHE qualified credit for this webinar series, which would include 2 credits if you joined on Tuesday's session, as well as today, 1 credit each. My name is Caleb Lozinski, Outreach and Education Specialist with the National Rural Health Resource Center, who is providing this webinar today. Your audio is muted by default to avoid background noise and feedback. Please remain muted unless you have a question. To unmute your line, please select the microphone icon in the lower left corner of your screen. If you dialed in, you can do so by pressing *6. The National Rural Health Resource Center is a nonprofit organization dedicated to sustaining and improving healthcare in rural communities. The center is the TA provider for the Delta program. The National Rural Health Resource Center is funded by the Federal Office of Rural Health Policy in collaboration with the Delta Regional Authority. Now, if you weren't here on Tuesday, I'm not going to go ahead and reread their bios, but I did want to give a wonderful shout out to our two just phenomenal speakers today. Shannon Studden will be leading this presentation, and Alexis Foster will be joining us a little bit down the line. If you have any questions, she'll be making sure to monitor the chat box. And this is we want this to be a collaborative session. So if you do have any questions, just let us know. Feel free to put it in the chat box because we'd love to answer them for you. I will now turn it over to our wonderful speaker, Shannon Studden, to kick off this webinar today. Shannon, thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you, Caleb. Thanks for that lovely introduction, and it's great to be back with everybody today. I'll just echo what Caleb said. If you've got questions, please ask them anytime. This is, as Caleb said, intended to be pretty conversational. Last time we had a couple of really good questions, and we love that. So the more the better, so bring them on. I'm gonna go get started here. So here's kind of what we talked about last time and what we'll get into today. Last time was kind of laying the foundation for kind of the real meat of the subject that we're going to cover today. So last time we talked about how important it is for leaders to be adaptable and think about who they're talking to, what the circumstances are, what might be important to the other person, and adapt their approach accordingly, and how that impacts employee engagement and ultimately leads to more retention and the long-term success of the individual, the team, and the organization. When we talked about key sources of difference and what that looks like, and I'll go through a quick summary in just a second, kind of just a real quick recap before we launch into the topics for today, which are kind of getting into specific practices and activities that we can incorporate some of the things that we talked about on Tuesday. So what does it look like to be adaptable in one-on-one meetings? What does it look like to be adaptable in coaching conversations and feedback conversations? In addition to kind of combining that with what are some of the best practices around all of these things, regardless of who you're talking to? Because we know that one-on-one meetings, coaching, and really impactful feedback can have a major impact on employee engagement. Here are the questions we'll answer today. So how can leaders structure one-on-ones to strengthen engagement? How can we optimize the impact of feedback conversations in those discussions with our team members? And how can leaders best develop employees through coaching? And just like last time, we'll probably be talking about some things that might be familiar to some of you, not familiar to others, but we just ask that you kind of take all of the information that we share and find your 1 or 2 nuggets that are most meaningful to you and could help you going forward. And also, if you've got some suggestions and tips for the rest of the audience to share, we'd love to hear those as well. So we just ask that you kind of listen with an open mind and pick your 1 or 2 nuggets. So quick recap of last time. So we defined engagement as this: the extent to which employees are passionate about their work and committed to the organization. And we know that healthcare organizations, well, really all organizations who have higher employee engagement, see higher, more improved business results compared to peer organizations with lower engagement. So we know in healthcare, when hospitals and clinics have high employee engagement, high provider and nursing staff engagement, it's associated with all the things that healthcare organizations are working towards. So clinical safety and quality scores, patient experience scores, and ultimately financial performance. So engagement, brings all these benefits that, like employees in their interactions with patients and with customers and with each other. It's a more positive, constructive experience. Employees tend to stay, and all of that combined with a lot of other things results in improved financial performance. We talked last time about the drivers of engagement. So capacity to engage is about having the resources needed to engage in our work. Motivation to engage, which is about finding meaning in our work. Freedom to engage, which is about feeling safe and that it's worthwhile to really dive in and engage in work and ask questions and give input. And strategic engagement. So that do I know how I fit into the big picture of the organization, and are my efforts and the efforts of people around me aligned with what we know our long-term goals are. If you've done an engagement assessment through the center, the salary and benefits is also a category on that assessment. And we know that while salary and benefits don't all by themselves contribute to engagement, they kind of set a minimum standard. So it's kind of like the criteria that has to be in place in order for employees to get to these 4 kind of higher order influencers of engagement. And then last time we got into how leaders play a role in all of this. And what we know is that organizations with the most effective leaders are more likely to outperform their peer organizations, significantly more likely to do so. They have 3 times higher engagement than their competitors. There's a lot of research that shows that an individual employee's regular interactions with their leader, has far and away the biggest influence on that employee's experience and engagement in their work. And that they have higher rates of retention than their competitors, which goes along with what I just said about how engagement leads to retention, which feeds into financial performance. And what we know about the most effective leaders is that they tend to have higher levels of emotional intelligence than less effective leaders, which is all about being aware of ourselves and how our emotions impact the way that we interact with others at work, and that we can kind of manage those. So regardless of how we're feeling, we can get ourselves in the mind space that we need to do what we need to do and to show up for other people the way that we intend to show up for them. So, and then there's also a social component. So people with higher levels of emotional intelligence can kind of read the room and understand how people around them are feeling. And then with relationship management skills, can kind of influence the people around us. So can we get people excited about an idea? Can we bring everybody together and marshal everybody's forces to achieve a common goal? That's all about relationship management. So, so we know that the higher emotional intelligence generally leads to more effective leadership. And the really good news is we can develop our emotional intelligence over the course of our lifetime. As I think I said this last time, but a lot of us, as we've grown, have become better at all of these things because you learn by trial and error. You learn by watching the people around you and how they handle things. And so a lot of the things that we're talking about today will incorporate a lot of these different skills, because it's all about being really intentional in our actions with people in order to kind of support all of those elements of engagement that I talked about a minute ago. Lastly, just for the last part of our quick recap, we talked about a couple of ways that people differ that show up commonly in the workplace. We know that there are an infinite number of ways that people are different from each other, but a couple of the big generalizations that we talked about were around characteristics such as personality traits, level of experience, and life stage or generation. And we spoke again in really broad generalities about what tends to be important or big motivators for people who are in different levels that have different levels of experience in their role, might be at different stages of life, may have different personality traits. And we'll kind of pull from some of those as we talk about one-on-one meetings, coaching, and feedback conversations today. And here are some lovely pictures illustrating those three things. So we kind of have a dual track of topics today. So we're sharing some evidence-based approaches for strengthening employee engagement through these three practices. And like I said, we'll also be incorporating just some examples of ways that we can bring some adaptability into each of these scenarios, pulling in some of the pieces that we talked about last time. So let's talk about one-on-one meetings. An impactful one-on-one meeting is what's shown here on screen. So it's a regular and a recurring time for a manager and a member of their team to discuss things like role clarity, to really understand responsibilities and where your sandboxes, where your responsibilities lie, what assignments and priorities. We all have a lot more on our plate probably than we can handle at any given one time. And so think about how you can prioritize things. Any roadblocks, any challenges that the other person is encountering as they go about their daily work, they can be focused on growth and development, and thinking about career planning and employee well-being. So they can focus on a lot of different things, but overall, what we know about the most impactful one-on-one meetings and the way that to really and use them as a tool for strengthening engagement and helping employees feel valued and heard and feel like they're really part of the bigger picture, is that the focus is on open communication and relationship building, which can be a shift in thinking for some people, because I work with a lot of clients who use these as times just to get progress updates on how things are going. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that can maybe be when that's becomes more of a side conversation or an outcome of some of these other conversations. Sometimes it just kind of organically becomes, you kind of get some progress updates. But really, if you can have the mindset, if you're someone who conducts one-on-one meetings, that your goal is really just to make sure that there's open communication and that you're working to strengthen that relationship, that's where the real bang for the buck comes when it comes to employee engagement. If you already engage in employee rounding or leader rounding, you've probably experienced the benefits of a one-on-one meeting with some of these kinds of conversations. The kind of one-on-ones that we're talking about today probably go a little bit deeper than sort of the traditional the traditional rounding conversation, which is pretty short and to the point. What we're talking about today is going just a little bit deeper with those to really focus on the relationship building component of those conversations. So there are many researchers who suggest that the single most important tool that we have at our disposal for fostering belonging, which is a big part of engagement, is that I know I'm part of the big picture and I know I fit in. And I feel supported, which is part of capacity to engage. Do I have the resources I need to engage? And that all comes, the one-on-one meetings is the single most important tool that we have in our disposal to strengthen those things. So I've been nerding out a little bit on the research of Dr. Stephen Rogelberg at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, who is an organizational psychologist who has spent his career studying the science of meetings. And in the last couple of years, he has zeroed in on one-on-one meetings. And so he has a lot of really robust research, not only around just meetings in general, but getting really specific into one-on-one meetings. And my favorite quote from him is in the yellow box here. So that his position is that one-on-ones aren't an add-on to the job. One-on-ones are the job of a leader, which can probably feel overwhelming if you wear a lot of hats as a leader, which most of us do, and particularly in a rural environment where you may be working with patients and serving as a leader, and maybe other hats as well. But really thinking about how powerful these things can be and prioritizing them in whatever way you have the capacity to do can make a really big difference. And here's the critical mindset, because it's all about relationship building. It's the critical mindset shift that Rogelberg advocates for is thinking about it as their meeting. It's the employee's meeting. So this means kind of shifting maybe from thinking about these meetings as a leader-driven check-in to a kind of a shared space where there's kind of mutual input into what's discussed and how the meeting gets structured. And because it's their meeting, it's even more important for leaders to be really intentional about approaching these meetings in ways that are meaningful to each person and adapting our approach to really meet people where they are. So that all kind of having that mindset lays the foundation for these meetings to zero in on the priorities, which are about, again, open communication, relationship building. So I'm going to share some of the research-based best practices, and I just want to be sure to point out that all the things that we talk about today about one-on-one meetings and everything that follows is not intended to be a checklist for you to say, got to do that, got to do that, got to do that. Oh, we don't do that, don't do that. But this is just kind of throwing a lot of concepts and practices out on the table. And again, just for you to pick and choose and find maybe one that might be helpful for you, because every organization is different, every team is different. What works somewhere may not work somewhere else. And so we just share these and give you the discretion, if that's the intent, give you the discretion to figure out what makes the most sense for you. So here are some common pitfalls in one-on-one meetings. Leader-dominated dialogue is one. So the guidance is to kind of aim for the employee to do at least 50% of the talking, 50 to 90% of the talking. And I have a couple of clients. I was actually just working with one yesterday who's working on their one-on-one meetings, and she said she's really struggling to talk less than 50% of the time, and that is not unusual. But it just kind of having that as a goal, she feels like she's making a big difference. Focusing on updates and tasks, again, to make it less focused on progress updates and more about that open communication and relationship building. So to see how things are going, what kind of barriers are you coming up against, and how can I, as your leader, support you? Unstructured or rushed conversations, we'll talk about how agendas can be helpful in a minute. Frequent canceling or rescheduling. The idea is to make that a rarity rather than a regular practice, and not having clear next steps. So we have a nice conversation. Yes, we've had open communication. We've built some relationships, but what did we decide? Or what did we decide was a priority going forward? That can be a pitfall too. So we'll get a little bit into that. Without some intention and some structure, they lose their value, and they work against the goal of open communication, relationship building, because things kind of fall apart long term. So here, if those are the pitfalls, here are the best practices. So number one is to prioritize consistency over duration. So a lot of times people say, well, gosh, how long should a one-on-one meeting be? And I will share with you what the research shows, but again, what works overall may not work for a specific organization. And so just having something consistently on the calendar so that both of you know there's going to be a time, whether it's once a month or bi-weekly, whatever it is that you know that if something comes up, you've got this time already saved on the calendar to have an important conversation. Again, to create the agenda together so that both of you get some input into what you're going to talk about, to ask good questions as the leader and listen. Questions are one really great tool, and we'll talk about those in a minute, to help stay in listening mode and to keep that ratio in mind of trying to speak less than half the time. And following up. So you'll have, if you have some action items or some next steps, to follow up on those, whether it's in between meetings or at the next meeting, to see, hey, here's what we decided last time, what's been happening with that. So the prioritizing consistency over duration. As I said, sharing a little bit of the research. So there is actual research into what makes for the most effective one-on-ones, and that's weekly or bi-weekly. Usually when I work with hospital leaders and I say this is what the research shows, their eyes get giant, because that is a lot of time, and totally get it, which is why I want to emphasize this is not, we're not saying this is what you should do. But monthly is absolutely fine. So just that, if you meet more often, you can make them shorter. So maybe once a week for 15 minutes, or maybe bi-weekly for a half hour, maybe monthly for, half hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is. But just, again, consistency, the consistency is more important than exactly how long it is. And I work with a lot of leaders who will say, well, I have some employees I know I'm going to need to schedule more time because usually they have a lot to say. And that's totally fine too. Making cancellations a rare occurrence. So I'll confess I used to do this with my team, as I would check in with people and say, hey, do you have anything to talk about in our one-on-one this month? And I don't really either, so let's just wait till next month because we both seem busy. That's not a best practice. So if the goal is not so much about catching up, but about keeping the avenues of communication open and building trust, then it's important to keep consistent with those as much as possible, and to show up on time. But you can always, if you've got them on the calendar, things are busy, you can always keep them really short if everybody's swamped, and everyone would just feel better getting back to work to get some things done. But just that quick check-in can really make a difference. So some ways to start thinking about adapting these. What we do know is that newer employees tend to need more frequent meetings, because they just there's more information shared. It's better. They may need some more hand holding and more just kind of check-ins to see, hey, how are things going? Is there anything that you're struggling with? And how can I support you as your leader? And then as they get settled in, you can make them a little bit longer. But most importantly is probably just to decide together what frequency works best, again, because you can kind of mutually create the plan. Speaking of co-creating or mutually creating the plan, co-creating the agenda. So you can keep a flexible format. There is no research supported best agenda, but just to make sure that agenda flexes with what's going on. Or maybe you have an agenda where there are some times that it's a little bit more work focused. What are your priorities right now? What kind of barriers are you running into that I can help with? And maybe once a quarter, there's more of a kind of growth and development focused agenda. There's a lot of different ways to make this work. In a lot of organizations, the employee takes ownership of the agenda. So the employee manages it and then just asks the leader for input rather than the other way around. But the benefit of this is that it can reinforce the idea that the meeting belongs to the employee, not the leader. Sometimes it's just, what are your items? What are my items? One of the people takes responsibility for putting those together, just so you've got kind of a plan of approach for that meeting. But either way, it is a best practice to share the agenda ahead of time, so that if some thought or information gathering is needed, that can be done before you meet. So some ways, again, because this is a mutual decision, there are ways to adapt it, and so that they don't all look the same for all employees. So for example, if you've got an employee who prefers to have some time for reflection, it's even more important to share the agenda ahead of time and maybe even give a little bit more lead time and ask them for so that they're ready to talk about their perspective when they get into the meeting. With a new employee, maybe a little bit more structured, maybe a little bit more focused on reassurance and questions to be answered and setting really clear expectations. And maybe with an employee who's very action oriented, to stay maybe out of the details unless you need to, and stay focused more on outcomes and goals and any barriers getting in the way of achieving the goals. So you've all worked with a lot of different people. You've seen how a lot of different people think. And so the idea is just to make these agendas kind of fit the personalities, the priorities of the leader and the employee, so that both of you can get your needs met and make them as impactful as possible. Thanks. So here's just a quick example of an agenda. This is just one example of a half-hour agenda. I just like this one because it's something a little bit different. And this comes directly from Steve Rogelberg's research. He got a couple of examples from some of the organizations that he sees as kind of role models in all of this. So here's one example: 5 minutes of just sharing good news for the week, inside and outside of work. What's going on? 5 important things that the employee has been kind of focused on, and how it fits with the bigger picture. 5 minutes on career development. Here's what's been happening with growth and development, and then 10 minutes of potpourri. So what else is happening that we need to talk about? Any information that needs to be shared by the manager. Very clear cut. Very it's kind of the balance between the structure, and a lot of things can happen within each of these boxes. These kinds of meetings can also serve as a great opportunity to practice your feedback and coaching skills, and the opportunities may come up in any of these boxes for that. And we'll talk about those shortly. So the last element that I mentioned earlier was to ask good questions and listen. Some examples of questions are here on screen, which may or may not be questions that are traditionally asked. So a lot of times we focus on what barriers, what challenges are you experiencing right now? And so it can be really helpful that's absolutely an important conversation to have, but also to focus on what's going well. And very often you'll hear surprises, things that maybe you didn't even know were happening when you ask that question. Where are you feeling stuck can be a little bit different way to ask about barriers. So just to kind of broaden the way that we think about challenges. Same as the next one: what's getting in the way of doing your best work? And one of the more important questions as a leader in a one-on-one conversation is, how can I support you? Especially when it comes to these challenges. So if you kind of have some standard questions like these, you can have questions that you just pull out depending on how the conversation is going and what's happening. That can really help you understand how that employee is doing personally and professionally. And some of these might sound kind of familiar to you if you do regular rounding, and others might be a little bit different. But as we know, the biggest predictor of one-on-one value is the amount of time that the employee speaks. So the aiming for, again, over half the time. And that's what questions can help us with. Here's just a couple of additional ones. You don't always have to ask the same questions. You can mix it up. So things like, what's something outside of work you're excited about right now? What makes you feel appreciated when you've done a good job? These can be really good opportunities to find out, the ways that are really meaningful for a specific employee to be recognized. Sometimes you'll hear things that surprise you, like someone might say, I'll tell you what I don't like. I don't like getting acknowledged in front of other people. I would really like to be thanked in private. But a lot of times as leaders, we tend to treat people the way we want to be treated, and those aren't always the same. So these open some good avenues for conversation when you can ask questions like these. Whoop. And lastly, follow up. So follow up is really important. again, just to kind of close the loop and keep these front and center, because these are such important conversations. So the best practice is for one of the two people, the leader or the employee, to take responsibility for distributing a summary. It doesn't mean it's a written report. Maybe it's 3 or 4 bullet points. Here's what we talked about. Here's what we decided. And if you said, okay, if you put any dates to it, that would be included as well. And again, thinking about how you might adapt the way that follow-up happens. If you've got less seasoned employees, they might need a lot more detail than experienced employees. People who, last time we talked a little bit about comfortable people who are more comfortable than others with uncertainty and new experiences. And so if there's a big change coming up and you had a conversation about it, your follow-up might include, with someone who's a little bit less comfortable with change and new things, just some more kind of reiterating some support and reassurance about what the future looks like. Here's what we do know here, and here's what the next steps look like. All right, let's get into feedback conversations. Whether it's during a one-on-one or outside a one-on-one, if you're a leader, you probably know there are endless opportunities for feedback conversations, whether it's positive or affirming feedback that recognizes achievements or great things that have happened, or constructive feedback looking to change behavior. There's a lot of opportunities to have these conversations. So the way that we handle them is the key part of all of this. When we handle feedback conversations in a certain way that promote developing trusting relationships between leaders and direct reports, and that also that can foster continued engagement and have that, again, have another way to have a really important impact on engagement. So the purpose of feedback is to influence behavior. That's the way that we think about it at the center. That's the way that that leadership experts tend to think about it. Influence behavior, foster engagement, and build trust. Whether you're affirming and giving positive feedback or you're giving constructive feedback, it is not only to influence behavior, but in the course of that conversation, to keep engagement strong and keep that trusting relationship between leader and employee. Well, so this probably sounds a little bit idealistic, and it is, because if you've ever had a conversation like this that didn't go very well, you'll know it doesn't always happen. But that's kind of to keep that in mind when you're having these conversations, that my goal is to be honest, build trust, keep the lines of communication open, keep you engaged in your job, and also to influence behavior. So when we structure feedback conversations in specific ways, we can maximize the odds of that happening. Just like with any interaction with people, there is no formula. People have free will and can make their own choices, but there are ways that we can approach them as leaders that make it more likely that all of the things that I just talked about are going to happen. And here's what we know about the research in the area of feedback, that when feedback is candid, it's more effective. Good feedback needs to be timely. So as soon as possible after the behavior has occurred, if we're talking about influencing behavior, the positive and affirming feedback or the constructive feedback needs to happen as soon as it can, which means that a yearly performance appraisal is not enough. That's not enough times in a year to be giving feedback to somebody to really influence their behavior one direction or another. It needs to be specific, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and balanced, that it's not a one-way delivery of feedback. It's a mutual conversation, because when we initiate a feedback conversation, it is incredibly likely that we don't have all the information. And so to come at it with a mindset of I'm gonna share my perspective and I'm gonna ask for your perspective. This model may look familiar to some of you. Some of you may already use this. Some of you may already use something similar. And if this model makes you think of SBIR, which is a tool that's commonly used to communicate about patients between clinical staff, often during change of shifts. It's not entirely different. It's not an entirely different premise, but this one is specific to feedback conversations. So here's what it looks like. So when you're ready to give feedback, again, whether it's just positive that you want to acknowledge something great that happened, or if it's constructive, you're aiming to stop or change a behavior. One very simple, clear way to address this conversation goes like this. So you share the situation. So who was involved? What happened? Where was it? Then you talk about the behavior, which is very specific, because we know feedback needs to be specific. So not about your interpretation of the behavior, but the actual behavior, the objective behavior, what you saw or what you heard. And then the impact. So here's the situation. Here's the behavior I saw or the words I heard. Here's the impact that it had on whatever the level of impact was. Was the impact on people? Was it on patients? Was it on the organization? Was it on the team? What was the impact? And then you engage in mutual conversation. So what was happening? What's your perspective? What do you remember about it? And then have a discussion about what might happen next. So here's an example. So imagine you're having a conversation with somebody who's making your team meetings really difficult. It could be an employee, it could be a peer, whatever it is. So the conversation might go something like this. The situation is at this morning's project team meeting. The behavior is, I noticed that you came in late and you asked to be caught up on what happened so far. This also happened last week. So I'm not making an interpretation. It wasn't, you came in all in a flurry and kind of ignored what was going on and prioritized yourself. That's a lot of interpretation of behavior, but here's the objective behavior we saw. You came in late, you asked to be caught up on what happened so far, and this happened last week. And the reason for the specificity is if I start talking about my interpretation of the behavior, that sets it up for debate. Well, I didn't come in a flurry. I wasn't only focused on myself, but it is harder to dispute the coming in late and asking to be the objective behaviors that you saw. The impact is this. So both times this happened, we haven't gotten to all the decisions on our agenda after we filled you in. And I'm worried that we're not going to be able to meet our deadlines as a result because we're missing some things that are happening. So it's impacting the team in this way. So can we just talk about it a little bit and come up with solutions? So what's been happening? How will you make sure you're on time next time so that we can get done what we need to get done? If you're somebody who really stresses about difficult conversations like this, I strongly recommend you just try this out. Even if you're just practicing with somebody who is somebody else, kind of a trusted colleague who can help you kind of check this out and see how it goes. And I think we have a feedback planner tool that will get shared out, Caleb. I think I'm right about this, with all of the materials that go along with this webinar. So you can try it out and make any changes you want to make this useful for you. But if it's something you're uncomfortable doing, just plan it out a little bit and see how it feels. One way to adapt these conversations is to really know what's important. Oops, sorry, too many animations. If you can target the impact, what you say about the impact to what's important to that person. So if you're talking to somebody who you know that people is a really important thing to them, they're really focused on how people are doing. If you can talk about the impact, if you're talking about constructive feedback or positive feedback, here's what you did and here's the impact that it had on the people around you. Or if it's somebody who's very focused on process and following a process and having a plan laid out, you can talk about the impact of the great stuff they did or the difficult stuff they did, the impact that had on the process. So that is probably the most powerful way to tailor feedback, is that impact statement. How did it impact the things that are important to the person you're talking to? And our last topic of the day is the adaptable coach. So we'll get a little bit into just kind of dip our toe into coaching practices. There is all kinds of great stuff out there, great research and great resources on coaching. I have a couple of researchers and experts that I tend to really like, and these two, Herminia Ibarra and Ann Scholar, who publish a lot in the Harvard Business Review, are great. And here's what they say about coaching. An effective manager is coach asks questions instead of providing answers. So this is really what coaching is all about, is about finding opportunities where maybe you're working with an employee who you feel like has the skills and the ability to do something, but maybe not the confidence or maybe not certainty that that is something that's in their area of responsibility or that they have the permission to do. And so whenever the opportunity for that comes up with one of your employees who is asking questions and you feel like, yeah, I feel like you could really handle this yourself, switch it around and you can switch into coaching mode, and asking the right questions can get them kind of problem solving and building their capacity and their confidence in kind of stretching themselves out of their comfort zone and getting into things that you feel like they're ready for. It's not always easy to stay in question asking mode because we as leaders often want to say, kind of give people the answer. It's more efficient for both of us. I've been through this before, but if you've got the time and it's the right situation, if you can focus on asking some questions to help them sort it out, that's where you really make a big difference in their development and their growth. Coaching is really about developing, supporting relationships, about facilitating learning, expanding people's thinking, all the things that are here. It's a really important part of developing people in their role, which is does a lot to foster engagement. Again, it helps them build confidence. It builds their capacity, not only in the specific scenario that you're coaching them on, but also just in their ability to engage in critical thinking and problem solving, which is good for them. It's good for you. It's good for the team. It's good for the organization. So there's almost no downside to it other than a little bit of extra time, which in the long run will pay off. It's a great career development tool, and last time on Tuesday, we talked about how career development is particularly important to people newer in career and people who are in the earlier stages of their life who are very focused on career development. Does not mean that people who've been around longer aren't interested in developing their career, but we know that, again, speaking in real generalities here, that tends to be a priority for people newer. So it's about all of these things shown here on the screen. And here, sorry, I'm a chronic double clicker. Some of the key concepts, just the key things to keep in mind when the opportunity for these kinds of conversations presents themselves is this, that the ownership of the issue rests with the coachee, that it's not your job as the coach to ensure that things happen and kind of manage the process, but it's really about them owning it. Your role as coach, your primary role is to ask questions and listen. So ramping up the listening proportion from one-on-one conversations, one guideline is to do 90% of the listening and only 10% of the talking. And that 10% is primarily made up of questions, asking the right questions. There's one way to think about coaching in a flow through the questions is to help employees think about things in this order. So when the opportunity presents itself, they come to you with a scenario, I'm not really sure how to handle it. You feel like you could probably help them get to a solution themselves. Start with a goal. So what are you aiming for? Then reality, ask questions about where things stand right now. So here's where you're going, here's where we are right now. And then options, what are your thoughts about how we could get from here to there? What have you tried before? What ideas do you have? And then of those ideas, what's the best course of action? What way forward will you decide? So some examples of questions, and we also will be sharing kind of a little menu and inventory of questions with the materials for this webinar series. Just things like, What would you like to have happen? How will you know you're successful? What does success look like? Why is what's important to you about this? There are a lot of different questions that you can ask to get at that goal. What are you aiming for? Reality. So what's happening with it right now? Darn it, double click again. Sorry. What progress toward the goal have you made so far? So what have you done so far that has worked? What has gone well, and where do you think the big challenge is? What are you struggling with? The options. So how do we get from here to there? Who could you call on to help you get what you need? What kind of resources do you need, and how will you get them? Have you done something similar to this before, and how have you handled that? What worked and what didn't work? Have you seen somebody else handle this? How do they do it? What do you like about how they've handled it? So you can ask them really good questions to help them think through what their options might be. And the way forward. So of all those things, what's your plan of action? What do you think is the best way to get there? What's your first step going to be? What would make you feel more confident about it? And how might you make it happen? And again, one of the more important questions you can ask as a leader, what do you need from me or from others to help you get through this? Those questions, again, are really powerful. They're powerful. They're a powerful development tool and growth tool for you as a leader, as well as for the employee. And they're really have a powerful impact on engagement and retention and all the great things that come with it. They develop capacity and confidence in your employees, and nothing bad can come from that. They foster learning. They do all the things that are here on the screen and go a long way toward building trusting relationship and strengthening your own and your employees' emotional intelligence. Because we mentioned this last time, when we ask questions, that is the ultimate way to be an adaptable leader. You come in with a general plan, and the questions that you ask and the employees' responses to those questions take you in different directions. And so if what we're saying is that adaptable leader is all about kind of meeting people where they are when it matters most and making sure they have what they need to thrive, the only way to really get at that, to understand where people are and what they need, is to ask the right questions. So that's the tour around the toolkit for adaptability and strengthening engagement, are through some of the key practices like feedback conversations, coaching conversations, and one-on-one meetings. So Caleb, is it time to open it up for questions?
Yes, of course, everyone. If you would like to ask a question, you can either come off of mute. Again, if you called in, you can do so by dialing *6. If you would rather, you can also type it in the chat box and we can review it as well. Answer it that way.
And Alexis, I can't see who's here, but Alexis, if you're here, if you've got something to add,
No,
shout
I
it
think,
on up.
yeah, I'm here. I just wanted to say to everyone that I think being an adaptable leader is, like Shannon stated, is just asking the right questions and allowing your staff to know that you're interested in what they have to say. I think that's really the foundational piece of how you can be that leader that they need, but also where they can feel comfortable enough to come to you and express those things when there are things that are needed to be stated.
Love it.
Looks like we have a question. Will you be sending these slides out to us? They will be available. Caleb will be sharing those, and I think he'll be sharing them through our website as well.
This is Chrissy Smith. I have a question. And a comment. I want to just say this content was just so timely for me on today, because I just had my one-on-one. We were able to get through some things, but I see that, of course, there's always an opportunity to kind of revamp. I like some of the the ideas and the pointers that you guys gave for to be an effective, to have an effective one-on-one meeting. So I'll definitely be taking some of these things back. Um, During my one-on-one with the person that I'm working with, we always have like a little time to just kind of talk about family. We are virtual, so we do get to talk about family and things that we have going on. But sometimes it can get out of the way. It can go on longer than we want. And I know we want to, our touch bases are usually twice a week. One is a
Oh,
check-in
wow.
and one is a check-in and one is like a closeout for the week. So we do try to put like a personal touch into it. So we do meet for like an hour and a half, and sometimes it goes a little longer than that. But I just wanted to know, like, when I feel like, or when it seems like the meeting or has gotten beyond, we should be kind of gently nudging each other back in to really get to the focus. How do you suggest leaders do that and not let it
So,
just kind of get carried away?
so Christy, are you talking, is this you as a leader meeting with people on your team, or is it you meeting with your manager?
Correct. Me as a leader
Okay.
meeting with my team.
Do you have an agenda for these meetings?
I typically don't, but I
Okay,
do give a very thorough summary
okay.
thereafter. And then we just kind of like pull from there and see how much of that we were able to really address throughout the week in our closeout.
Sure. One thought is just to structure it with an agenda, even if it's a really vague agenda, but just kind of like, we're going to take 5 minutes to do this. Well, 5 minutes, just a quick catch up, 10 minutes on kind of priorities at work. Well, because then if you're kind of both looking at that, especially if it's virtually and you kind of got it up on screen, I don't know if you have it up on screen when you were looking face to face through video, but if you've got an agenda, you can have at least a planned time limit for that personal catch up. Maybe that's the 5 minutes at the beginning of the meeting. And then you can say, oh, we've got this other stuff that we've got to get to. We've got 20 more minutes. Maybe it's time to move off. That would be one. And another is I think it's okay to say, well, I'm really dying to hear how things have been going with this project, or to hear how your week has been going here at work, to kind of make that shift. So it's still a personal conversation about it, but it's an informal way to kind of pull the topic back to where you want to get to in that meeting. I don't know if that helps at all. Those are some initial thoughts.
It does. Thank you so much for that.
You bet. Alexis, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you hit it, Shannon. I would just say I always think that one-on-one meetings to start off with something personable and then close the meeting off with something personable as well. I think that's a really key point as well.
Okay. Love it.
Do we have any other questions?
I have a question, and so we are. I mean, my company is somewhat spread out in different areas, and so I can coach my team. I'm HR, but I can coach my team. But my concern is that my leaders have exposure to this content to help company-wide. It may necessarily, I mean, to one for motivation and one to determine what the lack of motivation is. So, and my point is that as administrators or whatever, we can't be at all sites. We have to have a strong leadership team to have the best effect. I don't know how to do that, and I guess two-part. One, how do I get you or someone to come and do that? Because I think it's received a lot better from quote unquote the expert. And how do I do it? I mean, I need some suggestions or some.
That sounds like a question for Alexis. That's a good one for Alexis.
So
Okay.
which organization are you with?
So I'm with Aaron Henry Health Center.
Okay, so
We're one of your,
so after this call, I can actually set up a call with you and we can discuss those options of us actually having the opportunity to come on site and the different avenues that we can take to really address, you know, what is really going on at the organization and how we can address those.
okay. Okay, great.
So yes, being a part of our program, you have that opportunity to do that.
Okay, great. I just put my number in the chat box.
Okay. Thank you so
I
much,
don't want to
Michelle.
miss you. I don't want to miss you, so that's why I gave you my cell. It's always
No,
on day and night.
it's no problem at all. That's what we're here for. So I'll definitely reach out to you to discuss those options that are available.
Thank you.
No problem. Are there any additional questions? Well, I think we are at almost time. So if there's not any additional questions, I do know that these two webinars will be distributed and they will be available on our website. So just be on the lookout for communications from Caleb. And if you have any additional questions, our contact information will be available on these slideshows as well.